The kingdom was in danger. From the top of the walls, the soldiers could see the torches of the enemy army shining like a sea of fire in the darkness. There were thousands, an impossible number to beat. Fear spread through the streets like an icy wind. The king, on his knees, prayed. The people, silent, expected the worst. Then, when all seemed lost, something incredible happened. In the silence of the night, a mysterious presence appeared on the battlefield. An angel. Sent by God himself, he passed through the enemy camp with indescribable power. In a matter of moments, 185,000 soldiers fell. No human sword was drawn. No military strategy was necessary. In the morning, the first rays of sunlight revealed an unbelievable scenery. The army that once threatened to destroy everything, simply no longer existed. The kingdom was saved. The king, once surrounded by fear, now witnessed a miracle before his eyes. That day, the impossible happened. And the people never doubted the power of God again. Get ready for a story full of emotion, challenges and twists. Before we start, leave a like, subscribe to the channel and embark on this epic journey with me. Imagine a young king, surrounded by gigantic uncertainties and challenges. That was Hezekiah. At just 25 years old, he ascended the throne of Judah at a turbulent time, shortly after the death of his father, King Ahaz. But unlike many, Hezekiah didn't just want to rule, he wanted to change history. From day one, he made a decision that would transform not only his life, but also the future of his people. He chose to trust God completely. And this unshakable faith is what made him an extraordinary leader. Your first big challenge? Restore the temple in Jerusalem. For years, the sacred site had been abandoned and corrupted. But Hezekiah knew that, for Judah to prosper again, it was necessary to start with the most important thing, bringing God back into the hearts of the people. And that was just the first battle of many. Once he took the throne, Hezekiah wasted no time. He knew something needed to change, and fast. The people were increasingly distant from God, worshipping idols and following wrong traditions. But he was not willing to let this continue. With determination, he ordered that all false altars be destroyed. Idols that kept people from the right path were removed, and the temple in Jerusalem returned to being a place of true worship. But Hezekiah didn't just want to get rid of idolatry, he wanted to rekindle love for the God of Israel in the hearts of the people. To do this, he restored the rituals and practices that helped people reconnect with God. But don't think he did it just to comply with the schedule. On the contrary, his faith was so strong that he was not afraid to face wrong traditions that were rooted in the kingdom. An incredible example of this courage was the case of the bronze serpent. Many years earlier, in the time of Moses, this serpent was a sign of God's power. Anyone who looked at it would be cured of poisonous bites in the desert. But, over time, the people began to worship her as if she were a god, calling her Nustan. Hezekiah realized that this was wrong. Without hesitation, he destroyed the serpent. He wanted everyone to understand a simple but powerful truth: faith is not in objects, but in the living God who cares for everything. With this attitude, Hezekiah proved that his faith was not just words, it was action. His example awakened a new love for God in the hearts of the people of Judah. He didn't just restore the temple, he restored the nation's faith. After restoring the temple and ending idolatry, Hezekiah not only brought back true worship but opened the way for God to act powerfully. And the divine answer came. God honored his faith with blessings, showing that he never abandons those who seek him with a sincere heart. But this story wasn't just about faith, it was about courage, challenges and miracles. What Hezekiah didn't know was that his greatest test was yet to come. The shadow of war. The danger was approaching. A powerful enemy was marching towards Jerusalem. Your name? Sennacherib, the feared king of Assyria. He led one of the most brutal armies of the time, known for its overwhelming strength and merciless strategies. City after city he advanced without mercy, destroying everything along the way. And now, the target was Jerusalem. Hezekiah looked around and saw an entire kingdom counting on him. What to do when everything seems lost? A risky bet. In an attempt to avoid destruction, Hezekiah made a bold choice. He sent Sennacherib a gigantic tribute, more than 10 tons of silver and about 1.5 tons of gold. To obtain this fortune, he needed to gather all the treasures from the temple and the royal palace. It was a dangerous gamble, but perhaps it was the only way to save his people. But the king of Assyria didn't just want gold. He wanted absolute power. To him, Jerusalem was just another city to be conquered, and a king who trusted God was no threat to his armies. And so, even after the enormous tribute, the threat continued. Hezekiah had done everything to protect his people. But now, there was no more gold to offer. There was only one option left, trusting God to fight this battle. What happened next was something no one expected. And the wind cut through the walls of Jerusalem, bringing with it a dark omen. Outside, the Assyrian army waited, implacable, like a storm about to break over the city. In the heart of the enemy, an arrogant king laughed. His gaze was one of disdain, his voice a thunder of derision. "Who is the God of Israel to stop me?" he proclaimed, arrogance dripping from his words. He had already crushed kingdoms, overthrown gods, and now, Jerusalem would be nothing more than another reminder of his glory. Inside the gates, silence was heavy. Attempts at peace had failed. Fear infiltrated the streets like an invisible poison. King Hezekiah felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. But instead of giving in to despair, he made a decision. He fell to his knees and cried out. There were no armies, there were no alliances. There was only faith. The sackcloth replaced their royal robes, a symbol of surrender, not to the enemy, but to the only one who could save them. His lips murmured a fervent prayer, and the question hung in the air like a thread of hope. Was Jerusalem doomed? Or would God show, once again, that no king, no matter how powerful, could challenge his authority? The cry of a king, the sound of enemy boots echoed in the distance. From the top of the walls of Jerusalem, the guard saw the horizon taken over by the Assyrian army. There were thousands. Implacable warriors, thirsty for conquest. In the heart of the city, King Hezekiah felt the weight of the threat. But, instead of giving in to fear, he made a decision. He ran to the temple of the Lord. There, in the midst of uncertainty and despair, he did what many would not do. He chose to worship. The city seemed defenseless. For Sennacherib, king of Assyria, that battle was already won. But then, in the dead of night, something happened. While the soldiers slept under the starry sky, an invisible force was moving. God had sent his angel. Like a divine shadow, he swept across the enemy camp. There were no screams, there were no crossed swords. Just silence. When the sun rose, the residents of Jerusalem looked beyond the walls. Where once there was an unbeatable army, now only bodies remained. 185,000 fallen soldiers. No man of Judah had fought, no military strategy had been necessary. God had won the battle alone. Fear gave way to amazement. What seemed like the end turned into a living testimony to the power of God. Sennacherib, the king who mocked the Lord, fled humiliated to his land. But his story did not have a happy ending. Inside the temple itself, while worshipping his gods, he was murdered by his own children. The man who thought no one could stop him was struck down without any enemy sword touching him. Hezekiah's personal challenge, the victory over the Assyrians, was a milestone, but Hezekiah's journey was not yet over. Shortly thereafter, a new battle arose, not against enemies of flesh and blood, but against death. The king fell seriously ill. The diagnosis came through Isaiah himself: "Put your house in order, because you will not recover." It was a death sentence. But Hezekiah, the king who trusted God on the battlefield, now needed to trust him with something even more personal. With tears in his eyes, he turned to the Lord once again. "Remember, O God, how I always walked in your presence." And God heard. Before Isaiah left the palace, the Lord gave him a new order: "Go back and tell Hezekiah that his prayer has been heard. I will give you 15 more years of life." As proof of the miracle, Isaiah asked that a paste of figs be applied to the king's wound. And in a short time, Hezekiah was completely healed. A God who answers Hezekiah lived to tell not one but two miracle stories. He learned that trusting God is never a mistake, whether in the face of powerful armies or in the face of human frailty. That morning, Jerusalem didn't just see a miracle. They felt it. The God who answers prayers had, once again, shown that his word is always fulfilled. Hugs and stay with God.